Things could get very awkward for Sony in 2027, especially after what's been going down now, of course, with a massive amount of pushback on social media. People saying that their bank of goodwill has basically been used up. I think that's an interesting thought there, especially as we head towards what many believe to be the most expensive generation we've seen introduced potentially with $1,000 consoles, and it's gonna be an interesting presentation to see how they sell us on that, like what the pitch really is. But here's the question I have. What if the market is so unfavorable for Sony that they can't launch the PlayStation 6 holiday 2027? In fact, what if that actually clashes with the plans that they had in place after announcing the physical disc production ending to start January 2028? That's what we're going to go over here today because there's a chance that Sony could kind of get caught between a rock and a hard place here. And I really don't know what that means for them as they head towards next generation, other than it's gonna be a challenge. That might be putting it mildly, but that's what we'll go over here today. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. So our story, of course, starts here with the physical disc production ending January 2028. New games releasing on PlayStation consoles. You've seen this blog post over and over and over again, I'm sure, because guess what? The conversation is not really dying down. It's been more than a month now, and it's still going. I don't know if Sony really expected that. I'm sure they obviously expected some blowback for this, but man, more than a month later and it's still going. They keep getting community noted on anything they say on Twitter, and it's just constant barrages of comments all over social media. Even on like YouTube, they post a trailer and people are in the comments beating them over the head about this. So why would Sony announce this now? Because in their recent shareholders Q&A that they had, they were talking with different analysts as well, and there were questions getting thrown around about physical disc production ending and like what their strategy is, like did they expect all this stuff to be going down online? And for the most part, they just said that's where the consumer behavior is taking them, and in a roundabout way trying to explain that, yeah, the margins are better and we think we can finally rip off the band-aid and push the last remaining physical buyers over to digital. And hey, if we can't, I mean, the margins are so good, it really won't actually matter to the bottom line. I mean, that's really it. So while right now gamers are pushing, it seems online to do things like the PlayStation Blackout and others, I think the big tell, if any of this really affects Sony, is when it is time to start talking about next generation. I mean, look, face it, GTA 6 is coming up. The mainstream is steering the ship, as I've said, and GTA 6 plays into that completely. They already mentioned on their recent conference call, Take Two, that the pre-orders that they've gotten so far exceeded their expectations. They didn't say a number, but the fact that they are like exceeding expectations for GTA 6 with pre-orders and we haven't seen gameplay for it yet, I mean, it's going to be tough to go up against a behemoth like that. I mean, generational release, something we don't see very often, and of course is lined up to happen months after Sony made this announcement and annoyed a lot of people. But I think that GTA 6 situation can be a bit of a mirage for Sony. And what I mean by that is, as we go into 2027, I think there's going to be a struggle here for them with the PlayStation 6. All right, so the plan apparently, at least has been thrown around in the rumor mill, is that Sony was thinking about launching the PlayStation 6 holiday 2027. Microsoft, I guess, is lining up with Helix, and they've already talked about Helix, so I would have to assume that the fact that we've known about it now for months means that it is going to come out in, I don't know, a year and 3 months or something. So like, you feel like they were talking about it a year and a half in advance because they do have plans to also go in 2027. However, Microsoft doesn't sell nearly the number of consoles that Sony does, and they also don't really rely on the console as much as Sony does. So when I start seeing how the market is becoming increasingly unfavorable to the idea of a console that is typically supposed to be approachable for the mainstream, can go into retail stores and sell at a decent enough price, and I'm starting to think that $1,000 might be optimistic. That's kind of a problem. So we're of course dealing with everything that's happening with this Ramageddon thing. where AI data centers and AI customers for these different organizations are eating up like 70% of global DRAM supply, which means there's not much left for anyone else that's not making a data center. All right, whether the data center is going to work or it's sitting around doesn't matter. They're overpaying even at this time for RAM. And while you feel like SK Hynix, Micron, Samsung, they would want to start spinning up more manufacturing, I kind of feels like even they're thinking, "Ooh, this might not last." So does it make sense for us to go heavy into more production facilities and lines that will take 2 years to stand up, and then the demand's not there in 2 years, and we're just left with an overabundance of RAM? What a shame that would be, right? Cheap RAM. Oh, man, the worst. But they seem like they're also not not sold. So you have on one side, I guess companies that are overpaying for RAM, spiking demand. Some are saying it's like 200% demand versus 20% supply growth. Yeah, it's problematic. All right. So, with that in mind, you think about Sony and how they do have economy of scale in that they can put in larger orders, right? And they can bulk buy and try to figure out ways to get the price down when it comes to DRAM, which of course does then translate over to, we'll say, system RAM in these systems. So GDDR6, GDDR7, and then solid state storage. They need both of those. And those, as weird as it sounds, those are going to be the most expensive parts of these systems now. It's not even the GPU or the chip that they have to make and engineer. It's the RAM. Okay. So the problem we're running into is most of it apparently has sold out because they are running contracts, multi-year contracts, and all these AI companies seem to have no problem signing. It's to a point now where Apple is looking to China for RAM. So CXMT, according to Digital Daily, they were in talks with Apple. Apple, of course, because they do produce a lot of iPhones, a lot of iPads, a lot of things that need RAM, right? Typically, they can go, "Hey, we are going to put in a massive order with you guys, and it's going to be a ton of money, so we want a discount." I'll just to put it in context, let's talk about the iPhone. Last year in 2025, I believe they shipped, it was like in the neighborhood of 240 million iPhones. So think about that for a minute. We're talking about, oh, I wonder if Sony can ship 15 million PlayStation 6 systems. Oh no, here comes Apple, 240 million iPhones. And that's just the iPhone. CXMT just rejected them. They're like, no, it's not cheaper than that. In fact, apparently they decided to go with similar pricing. Here we go. So while CXMT is said to be willing to deal with Apple, it has quoted the iPhone maker the same prices that Samsung and SK Hynix are charging. So even they're like, oh, hold on. Nah, market is the market. Guess what? Price is going up. So yeah, that's where we are right now. Even Apple is struggling right now with their economy of scales to try to get prices within reason. We have the whole Apple leasing stuff that's happening now, and I can only imagine that's what we're going to see for a fairly expensive PlayStation 6. So the question really comes down to, why did Sony announce this now? A year and a half in advance. They were like, "Hey, we did it, guys, a year and a half." They told investors that. Hey, give us some credit, guys. We gave people a year and a half notice. The obvious thing is because the PlayStation 6 is all digital. And they can't really tell us that yet. They really can't tell us much other than this. So they have to sit there with this backlash constantly because we don't know if my wall of PS5 discs here are going to work with the PlayStation 6. Is there a disk drive that will be attachable to it? Can I use the current one that I have? Is there a disc to digital system like in place that they have planned out? We don't know because Sony is not talking about the PlayStation 6 and they can't yet. So what happens if the PlayStation 6 can't actually launch in 2027? What does that mean about this? People are saying, oh, they left it, they threw the grenade in the room and closed the door. And that's what's happening right now. It's just like explosive responses constantly online. And in a way that's true. What does Sony do then? Honestly, I guess they have to push to 2028 and just kind of sit with this weird situation of what does this mean for the future of PlayStation? Because it makes sense. January 2028 is when they're going to stop producing new games. Okay, well, yeah, it makes sense if the PS6 is coming out holiday 2027. But if it doesn't, and you still can't explain what the deal is with this and what this means for next generation, that's been a very awkward time for Sony. Typically, the hardware gets delayed because maybe the software isn't ready. Apparently, that's what was happening with Nintendo, and the Switch 2 got pushed so many months. That's been the reporting that was going around at that time because they were still working up the software and getting that lineup set. That makes sense. Like, you need good software for your hardware. It's always worked that way, and I think it will continue to work that way. But in this case, it might be the opposite. Like, the software could even be ready. That's probably going to be mostly cross-gen, by the way. And then Sony has to push the hardware. So now I'm sitting here thinking, okay, 2027, a PS6 shows up that is apparently the bill of materials a few months ago was near $1,000. What's the price of the system gonna be if all the RAM allocation is already sold out for 2027? And usually this is a lagging effect. So we'll of course see prices change and move around as we get towards maybe mid 2027. The word's been it's going to get bad this holiday. It's going to be the worst we've seen in 2027. And so when I see things with like this, for example, that scientists says RAM pricing has risen to normalized 2007 levels, AI shortage undid, 20 years of progress in a matter of months. That's crazy, because I do remember a time where RAM was expensive, and this is a long time ago. I'm talking about when I was first really getting into, like, custom PC building. This would have been I remember I got my first custom PC in 2002? Before that, I would get because like my uncle or my dad or whoever, they would go through computers for work, and their work would be like, just keep the computer, whatever. And so I would get it. And I remember I got real excited when I went from a Pentium 90 megahertz to a Pentium 133 megahertz because full motion videos started to actually play better, and Jedi Knight actually played better too. That's Hey, it's been a bit. But the point was, I remember in '02, RAM was kind of pricey, '03, '04, but there was a point where I got like a NVIDIA 8800 GT, the BFG edition, and I remember like, hey, RAM is getting cheaper now. Okay. And it got to the point where it was pretty easy to pick it up. And I mean, look, recently it has been until this whole AI thing has happened, and now 20 years being wiped out, and it very well could get worse. It seems like it's not a great climate to launch a system, but Sony might be kind of stuck because they've done the engineering with AMD. They've set all this up with Project Amethyst. I think AMD will go forward with a video card of some kind at some point, even though AMD and Nvidia, their gaming revenue, the percentage of their business keeps shrinking. And I do wonder how interested they really are in consumer grade video cards if this keeps up and they just keep making significantly more money in things like AI and more on like enterprise level. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below in the comments. Sony made that announcement, seemingly setting up for a PlayStation 6 reveal, I believe, in 2027. But if they can't make that happen and they just kind of have to sit with this announcement in a very jumbled schedule because of the way that this RAM shortage has worked out, how do you think that's going to go for them? Because I do believe, while in the short term, Sony is going to be fine. They're going to make a ton of money. Their forecast, I think they'll hit that because of GTA 6. I do wonder what happens when it's time to go to the Goodwill Bank and show off a PlayStation 6 that is north of $1,000, and how the market, or at least the mainstream market that I think Sony is really relying on right now, reacts to that. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.